to my channel. I'm Candace, and today I wanted to talk to you about how I use literature circles in my middle school classroom. I teach 7th grade English Language Arts, and I have been teaching for 11 years. I just finished my 11th year, and I have been using literature circles for about 9 years in my classroom. So I'm really familiar with how they work, and I've tried a lot of things, used a lot of different novels to teach them with, and today I just kind of wanted to go over the basics. If you're thinking about using literature circles and you don't really know where to start, I am going to do a part 2 to this video where I talk more about the actual novels that I use with my 7th graders. So the first thing is, what are literature circles? So they're like book clubs. You group your kids in groups, and they read a book within that group and they talk about it, and then you may have another group of kids reading a different book and a different book, just depending on how many books you want to use and how many groups of students you have. One of the resources that I used when I first started teaching literature circles was Mini Lessons for Literature Circles by Harvey Daniels and Nancy Steinecke, and this really is the best resource out there if you want to start using literature circles and you're looking for a book to help you out. This book lays out all the steps. It tells you, why use literature circles, what they are, how you can organize your groups, what lessons do you teach with them, what standards can you cover, how do you grade the students. It lays it all out for you. So basically, literature circles are a tool for teachers to use where you give students a choice. You can differentiate, and you get a lot of buy-in because of that. I know that my students, whenever they first do literature circles in my classroom, they love it. They always ask, when are we going to do another one? And so I'm always planning that next one for them to do. Now, as far as the year goes and my plan, I usually do a whole class novel at the beginning of the year, and then I go into using literature circles. So I do 2 or 3 for the rest of the year, just depending on the students and kind of what their needs are. But I started out using the mini lesson book to kind of understand where I start and how to get it going. So once you've kind of read through that book, you realize that there really are a lot of directions you can go with literature circles, and if you start looking up ideas for them, you'll see all kinds of Teachers Pay Teachers products that focus on a certain novel, or maybe for any novel, and those things work fine. But like I said, I really like the mini lesson book. When you get into the book, she or both of them discuss calendars and how to set up a calendar, which is really the first thing you do after you set your groups up. It talks about how your students will discuss, and it has variations on ways to get them ideas of discussing. It has mini lessons on powerful language and asking good questions and author's purpose, things like that. So there's a multitude of resources within that for you. When I decide that I am going to use literature circles, I have to decide what books do I want to use, basically. So I've done a variety of things. I've done it by genre, where I've had historical fiction literature circles, or nonfiction, dystopian literature circles. That one's always a really good one to start with because it really gets your kids into reading. I've also done them by theme or topic. So if I want my students to focus on factory work, or if I want them to focus on finding a theme in a novel, and the novels are really varied on what genre they are, but they're looking for theme as the overall topic that we talk about, or characterization is another one that I use a lot. So that's kind of how I decide, all right, this literature circle that we're going to start is going to be about characterization. And so I need to find books that have really good examples of characterization, and those are the books that I give to my students to choose from. So after I decide where, I'm going to start with them, I pick the books that I want, and I pick the books depending on, first, how many kids I have in the class and how many groups I want. So usually I would like to have about 5 to 6 groups. And I don't want to have my groups bigger than 5 people. I found either you want to pick from 3, because you can still get some discussion with 3. 5 is like the cap. After that, you've got too many students in a group. So you kind of want to figure out what number you want or need as far as your groupings go, and go from there. Usually when I do pick the books, I pick, let's say I want 6 groups, I may give them 7 or 8 choices just so there are plenty of choices for them and I can kind of fit their needs. So sometimes, even though maybe I was looking to have 6 groups, I will end up with 7 because one of the other choices, there was some kids who wanted that. So I may have like 2 kind of groups of 3 and then maybe a couple of other groups that are a little bit bigger, just depending on the identity of the class. Some classes, pick certain books and find them more popular than some of the other classes. So it just really varies by class. But once I have the students or the books picked, I have the students pick what book they want. So I make a PowerPoint, and on the PowerPoint I put the book cover and I put the synopsis of the book that you would find on Goodreads or Amazon, and I just go through and I talk about the book and I hold up the book and I show them, this is how long this book is, because that's really important. Some students are going to care about the length of the book and some students aren't, but I always want to point that out because I know I have those students that are going to pick the shortest book no matter what's the topic, because they know that they can't be bogged down reading a long book. And then others just are going to go for the topic and what sounds interesting to them. So I go through the choices and talk to them about it, and I will talk about past student experiences with the books. And after I've gone through all the choices, they vote on their top 3. So I give them a little ballot where I just have all the books listed, and beside the books that they want, they number them 1, 2, 3. I take that up, and then I set out to organizing who's going to be in what group. So how I do that, I just make, get a sheet of paper out and write the name of each book in a square, square it off, and I list the students who picked that book first. I put them under the book that they've chosen, and I put their second choice and then their third choice. And then I always tell them, I try to give you your first choice, but it's not always going to work out. And if you don't get your first choice this time, I make sure you get your first choice the second time. So I keep all this stuff that I've mapped out and who I've put in what group. So I know that for next time, if there are students who didn't get their first choice, that they will be able to get it the second time. So once groups are selected, the kids are excited to get in and reading, and the first thing we do is make a calendar. So I usually go on Excel, make a calendar for the month, and I divide my literature circles up into 4 weeks. I found that 4 weeks works the best. 3 is just a little bit too short unless you're working with super short books. So I have done graphic novels before, and those don't take 4 weeks to read. You could do a graphic novel literature circle in 2 weeks, easy. But usually I pick 4. So on the calendar, the meetings, which divide up what their goal is to read for that meeting, is going to be put on the calendar. So I'll have meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3, meeting 4 on some dates. Usually I try to do them once a week. You need to base this on how often your kids are going to read. My students read in class. We have 20 minutes of uninterrupted reading time at the beginning of the class period, so they get to read every day. They also do get to keep their book and take it home with them, because I haven't done this for so long. I've accumulated enough to where I can let my students have their own copy to take home with them. There was a time when I was still trying to get books together that I did have to have my students read just in class, and so for those I probably gave them a little bit longer than a week to read, maybe more like 7 days realistically, because of course they couldn't take the books home over the weekend. So that's just going to depend on how much time they have to read in class and outside of class. So they divide up the number of pages in their book by how many meetings they have. So if they have 400 pages in their book and they have 4 meetings, then they have to read 100 pages for each meeting. Now, I've seen some sources want to have them pick like how many pages they're going to read each day. I don't like to do that because I know some students read a lot quicker than others, and some, are going to read slow, and I don't want to put that pressure on them to feel like you've got to have 15 pages this day or this day. I like to kind of have them do it by week, and that way for the kids who are reading after school more or need to read after school more, then they can kind of plan for that a little bit easier. And with students who play sports after school or a band after school or things like that, where they, you know, maybe on Monday night and Tuesday night they know that they're going to be stacked full with stuff to do, they're not going to have time to read, then they know that they need to read maybe on Wednesday night when they're going to have a free afternoon or something. So I like to leave that open for them. And after they've planned what their pages are for reading, they start reading. And I have them start, you know, the first day when they start the calendar, then they get into the book and start reading. And on that first day after they read for however much time we have left in that class for them to read, you know, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15, I have them stop and start making a list of characters and settings. And I do that with all the literature circles. I just feel it's a good thing for them to kind of get those ideas down, and they keep up with their list throughout the whole book. Now, obviously, a lot of books, they're not going to come across a lot of new characters as the book goes on, but there are some that do, and they need to keep track of those. So I have them keep track of that with their group. Now, this is kind of where you can kind of change it up. I don't have my students sit with their literature circle group the whole time they're reading their book. They only meet with their literature circle books on meeting days. And I did this because I found that if I have them sit together during the whole reading process, some kids read faster than others and may spoil little things for the other students. So they are working in groups maybe with another group, which I usually call like their home group. But I have them in their literature circle groups on their meeting days where they get to meet and really talk about the book. And I also find that kind of that gets a better conversation when they are finally meeting for that meeting time together with their literature circle group that they haven't met all week, and they have a lot more to talk about than if they sat there daily and kind of can talk a little bit after they read each day. So that's kind of up to you if you want to do it that way or not. Alright, so what to have them do at their meetings. That's where a resource like the mini lesson book will come in handy, because it guides you to help students come up with good questions, discussion questions to ask for their group members. And it also kind of lets you pull back from mini lessons you focused on throughout the week. So let's say that first week you focused on powerful language, and you had your students pick out passages of powerful language. They would then share those in the group and talk about why they selected them and have a discussion on that. The group meetings can last for really however long you want the group meetings to last. Usually I plan for about 20 to 25 minutes, and I have found that it's really, you don't want to bog them down with a lot of stuff. You want to give them a few things that they are going to do, an agenda for their meeting. I usually set a timer so they know how much time they have that's visible. And at the beginning of the year, when they've never done literature circles before, I scaffold it a lot. I say, okay, first, here's what you're going to do in your group. And then I may give them 5 minutes to do that. And then I'll stop them and say, okay, let's start this next activity, or, you know, get on to your last discussion question or whatever. And as the year goes on and they're used to using literature circles, I take off those scaffolds and say, okay guys, here's your agenda. This is what you need to get done. The timer's set. And while they're talking, I'm walking around making notes. So this leads into grading. Okay, how do you grade literature circles? Well, I've done it different ways over the years, but I found the most effective thing to do is I give them a meeting grade. So the day that they meet, if they're prepared, if they're discussing, and they're actively engaged and listening with their group members, then they get a grade for participating in the meeting. They also get a reading check grade, and I've done it where I haven't done reading check quizzes, and I've done it where I have. My reading check quizzes aren't like, you know, what color shirt was the main character wearing on chapter 2 or whatever. It's really 3 simple questions. I ask them what page of the novel they're on. I ask them to give me a brief summary of the events that have happened. And then I usually give them a question that's really open-ended, like maybe, how does this setting impact the character in your novel so far? These are things that will tell me if they're reading. I let them use their books for the quizzes, because I feel like if they've read it and they need to look back to see how to spell something, or they don't quite remember where that scene took place, then they can go back and look at that. So they do get a grade on those quizzes. And then really the main grade comes at the end of the literature circles, where they complete some kind of project. And I've done variations of projects. I've done one-pagers. I've had them create Animoto videos on theme messages that they found in the novel. I've had them do book trailers or book talks for them. It really just depends on what is the reason for this particular literature circle, what's the standard that I really want them to cover, is the ultimate goal, and I kind of go from there. One other thing, when you're thinking of work and maybe how to organize the meetings of the literature circles, or whether or not to use jobs. And I have used jobs before, and I do find them useful with classes who need that scaffolding and that extra help. So when I talk about jobs, and you may have seen these before in any kind of group setting, but there may be a job assigned to one person who is the word wizard, who their job is, as they're reading that week, they're looking for vocabulary words to pull. Another person's job may be the literary luminary, so they pick in or pull out important information. So there's all kinds of little names that you can find for the students in the groups, and usually the jobs rotate out until the end of the literature circles are done. And like I said, I've used those with groups that I know need, or classes I should say, that need more structure with their meetings. Usually with my advanced classes, my pre-AP classes, I don't use that. We are focused on the questioning aspect and the like level 2, level 3 questioning, parts of the novels, and they usually do a really good job at going and pulling that stuff out without needing a job title to do that. But like I said, it works if you do want to use it, and there are all kinds of job ideas that you can get if you do a Google search or want to buy some kind of resource that goes along with that. But you don't necessarily have to assign your students jobs. And sometimes they like it and they like having that job to do and knowing that, eventually they will get to be passage picker one day. If you use jobs, your meetings for the students may last a little bit longer than 20 minutes. So if you do want a more, or a bigger chunk of time for your meetings, then a job approach would also be a really good idea. Alright, so that's my basics for literature circles. I would love to know if there's anybody out there that uses literature circles. What do you do? What have you found successful or not successful? And like I said, I am going to make a second video where I talk more about the books that I use for literature circles. If you have any questions about how I use literature circles in my classroom, I'd also like to hear from you. Thanks for watching my channel. Bye!